Well, happy Pi Day, everybody, and welcome to our special Blizzard Tuesday webinar. What better way to spend a snow day at home than watching one of our great webinars? That is, provided you have an internet connection. And if you're here, I assume that you do, and or else you're in a place that has no snow, in which case I hate you. No, I don't really hate you. Hey, everybody. I'm Chris Gaydos, editor of Growertalks and Green Profit magazines and the e-newsletter Acres Online, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so as we spend this Blizzard Tuesday getting more from your Proven Winners plants. Now, I don't have to tell you that Proven Winners is America's biggest and best-known line of branded plants. I rarely visit a greenhouse and not see some growing somewhere, but how do you grow them for maximum effect and maximum profit? How do you take them to the next level? Well, that's what we are here to learn, and I have got just the expert to tell us. He is John Gaydos, Director of Product Development for Proven Winners. Welcome, John.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm absolutely fine. Now, one of the fun things I always say about webinars is you can broadcast from anywhere you have an internet connection, and you obviously have an internet connection, so you're not broadcasting from Upper Pennsylvania somewhere. Where are you broadcasting from right now?
Rochester, Michigan.
Well, that's not a safe spot. It's up above Detroit, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Yeah. So how's the snow there?
Well, we have about 4 inches. Nothing major.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely nothing. It's like a day at the beach.
You got it.
And I understand you're in a brand new office, and from the echo, it must be pretty palatial.
Well, not necessarily palatial. It certainly has nothing else in it other than my make-believe desk and a couple computers.
Well, get some Proven Winners art up on the wall. And me, I'm broadcasting from the safe, warm confines of my non-palatial office here in Chicago, where we've only had a couple of inches of snow, thankfully. And look, I found a way to add video. Hey, everybody, look at that. I've absolutely animated our webinars. What next? Moving pictures? All right, a couple of quick things. I've already gotten one question from Scott, who can't hear any volume. And I'm hoping Scott can read this right now. He can't hear me talking about it, but this is for anyone who can't hear me right now. The rest of you figured it out. You got to click communicate, select the integrated voice conference, and once I get John rolling, I'll shoot Scott a private message just to help him out with that. Let's see, what else do we need to do? If you have questions as we go along, feel free to type them into the Q&A area. And if they're pertinent to what John happens to be talking about, I'll stop him and we'll address those questions right then. If not, or if they're a little far afield, we'll pick them up at the very end. And if they're really out there or they need a more detailed answer than we can give during this 1-hour webinar, I'll give you John's email address at the very end. If something goes wrong, the power lines go down, you lose your internet connection, or a customer comes in and you have to wait on them, fear not. This webinar will be archived at the same place that you signed up, ballpublishing.com/webinars. And I think that's all of my preamble. John, you ready to go?
I am indeed.
All right, take it away.
All right, thanks, Chris. Basically, what I'm going to talk about today is not so much about the plants, although we will take a look at some of the newer varieties and the new introductions coming downstream that we'll introduce at CAST, the California Spring Trials, in a couple weeks. But really what I'm more interested in talking about today is getting your plants off to a good start. When you look at the huge collection of Proven Winners, probably the one thing that is most common that we all have a tendency to forget is that first 10 days of crop in trying to get the systems all fired up to run. So if we could, Chris, if you flip to the next slide, most important thing that we need to talk about is preparation. You need to look at soil because that's where your liners have come in. You're ready to put them in your containers, and you got to take a look at the soil. You also have to look at your environmental climate, what's going on in your greenhouses. We'll touch on all of these momentarily. And then the timing of your growing process. Every single one of our plants, as well as everybody else's plants, have a optimum growing time. And the most important thing that you can walk out of your or set your headphones down and think about is the fact that it's far better to grow the plants, plant them, get the roots established, move them through the growing process, establish the plants with their buds and flower breaking, and then sell them. You don't want to stop anywhere in the process. You stop when you slow down that plant, you have to start it all over again. So the most important thing is start with the end in mind. When's your sale date? When do you need to have these plants hit the retail bench? And then how quickly can they move out through the door? But you never want to stop them. A couple of things to look at as far as scheduling, and that's going to be container size. Obviously, a 4.5 grande is going to take less time than a 1 gallon or a Royale, or even a hanging basket. You also need to look at the varieties. Some varieties grow faster, some grow slower. Some need to set up their root systems first and get established and get the roots all the way to the edge of the pot, and then they'll start to grow. Others will really start growing faster than the root system actually allows. And we'll talk about one plant in particular as we go through the process. And then lastly is the sales window. When you look at items that when your sales opportunities begin, you want to make sure the plants that you have available are the ones that can actually go outside and do well in a customer's garden. Selling Angelonia, which is really a heat lover, a midsummer plant, you don't want to sell that May 1st. You can certainly sell it by May 15th, May 30th, but May 1st, the weather's still going to be variable. So you want to be careful about when items actually are ready for sale. And again, that's all about timing. That's all about looking at the schedule. Let's talk about soil a little bit more in depth. And Chris, if you can flip to the next slide, that would be great. And then maybe you can't. Oh, yeah, there you go. Okay, so we're looking at this root systems. You have 3 pictures of plants in front of you. And one of the picture of the plant or the root ball on the right, you see very few fine root hairs. The middle one, you have roots coming down to the outside edge. And the one on the left, excuse me, I'm looking right to left. The one on the left has got very few roots. The one in the middle's got lots of roots, and the one on the right-hand side is optimum. And one of the things that really is critical is you can't build a plant without knowing what that system is all about, and that root system. The first 10 days of your growing, of having that liner in your hand or in your greenhouse, what you want to do is get that established and get those roots from the liner to the outside edge of the pot. Because until you get the roots to the edge of the soil media and start to develop the roots going downward, you really can't grow that plant. You can subject it to lots of different environments, but you really can't get the plant under your control. We used to say, pinch at the time of planting. Use a fungicidal drench at the time of planting. We've now kind of turned around and said, not necessarily. Let's back off, let the plant root into the soil ball, and then you can start applying or start growing that plant. So again, when you look at these plants, the 3 across the board, you're looking at not only root systems, but you're also looking at soil. The soil that's on the left-hand side is really a much heavier, almost a field soil mix. The one in the middle's got nice peat, but also still has some mineral soil in it. And then one on the far right-hand side is a peat-like mix. Obviously, a mineral soil is going to have a lot more weight to it. It's also going to have a lot less air porosity. Your roots need as much oxygen in the soil as they actually need to be in a space that they can grow through and absorb moisture. So you really want to have, you want to know what your soil's like and how you get it and how long you'll have it. When you look at your soil sources, so many of us use peat-like mixes, and they are absolutely phenomenal. But a peat-like mix in a bag may not have the same consistency from the top of the bag to the bottom of the bag. So you're potting out of, if you're planting out of a bag mix, make sure you put the bag, open up the bag of soil and kind of fluff it up, move it around on the bench, mix it up so you get good consistency all the way across the board. The last thing I want to show you about or talk to you about on this these 3 slides, and Chris, maybe you could back up one more. You notice the 3 different colors. It's always difficult when you're talking about when is it time to water. And the easiest way to look at how to convey watering terminology to other people who are perhaps watering for the first time is really, and this is probably because of my love of chocolate, soil that has the consistency of dark chocolate, the color of dark chocolate, very rich and chocolatey brown or black brown. Usually you could describe that as a wet soil. The soil that's in the on a nicely dried out plant or a plant that's drying down is going to be the color of milk chocolate, and that's closer to the color of the soil in the middle of the slide. And then the plant that's ready for water is really a much finer, very light chocolate color, or even maybe closer to the craft paper bag that you bought the 2 bars of chocolate in. So really, when you look at the chocolate, when you're looking at the soil, you really look at color, and that tells you, or that gives you some reference that you can pass on to people who are irrigating the soils for you. Okay, Chris, I'm ready.
So maybe you can combine some Easter candy presents for your employees with an irrigation lesson.
Absolutely. Okay, next we want to talk about a little bit about the environment. And obviously those of you who are on the East Coast today recognize the fact that you're going to be in a situation where you're going to see not a whole lot of sun for the next couple days. And if you're in a greenhouse, especially a double poly greenhouse, you're going to be looking at snow for a while. So I really want to talk about basically the geographic location where you're growing or where you are located, the structure that you're growing in, the type of covering that you have on the greenhouse. Is it glass? Is it fiberglass? Is it double poly, etc.? The other thing is heat and water. And those are all things that you can control. Perhaps you yourself can, but when you're building a greenhouse or looking at a facility to grow in, those are all things that you have some sort of environmental input in. And the thing that's important is that each one of these can impact the crops. Obviously, if your operation is, Chris, flip to the next slide, please. If you were in the south, in the green area that's on the slide, you'd be rolling already. You'd be looking at when your first customers are coming to the door, as compared to the northwest or the northeast, where we still have a long way to go before we can actually start selling plants. But when you look at the temperatures that you're actually growing in and how much they're influenced by your environment, you also then have to, obviously you're looking at, if you're in the north, you're looking at different types of heat system. You're looking at structural coverings that give you strength enough to carry snow loads, but at the same time are tough enough and durable enough to endure the situations where the environments that you're being given. So where your facility is located has a lot to do with not only when you start growing, but how you grow as far as the physical attributes of your facility. When you look at the different growing structures, obviously we'd love to see highlight plants love to see highlight. They're going to get that through glass, but they're also going to get that through the new acrylics. And under some situations, you're going to get beautiful growing conditions under double poly. Each of those roof coverings give you a different type of growing environment. A double poly greenhouse is not only going to give you a more insulated environment, but it's also going to give you more humidity, and you'll have to deal with humidity control with that. When you look at the acrylics and polycarbonates, they give you resistance and durability of structure. They certainly pass a lot of light through. And then when you look at a growing condition, a growing environment of glass, that's even better as far as highlight. Knowing where your structures are, knowing where your shade, where your structural elements of the greenhouse are, and how much shade they pass on to you or pass on to the crop, that's critical as well. Chris mentioned, or we mentioned this morning, about the snow load and the amount of snow that's occurring on the East Coast. We also recognize the fact that we want to spend the least amount of money on heat as we have to, but at the same time, it's a matter of protecting your structures, because there's a lot of plants in the greenhouses that are now being buried with snow, so you have to make sure you get the proper heat. But the interesting thing about difference between like a gas forced air, we're using a Modine or Resner or air heater, and how you transmit that air or that heat. I've seen some operations where the polytubes of the Modines are run underneath the benches, and they exhaust downward, and then the heat rises and comes up underneath the greenhouse bench. I've seen hot water heat as well as steam heat that's been run underneath the benches. Newer greenhouses have a lot of heat in the floor, and then obviously there are lots of heat in the sides and sides of the greenhouses, especially on the windward sides. Just recently, I was in a greenhouse last week up in the Northwest that had infrared heat. And infrared heat is a wonderful heat source that radiates downward, where you're heating objects, not the air, which is never grown in that environment, but it was working extremely well. So all sorts of different heat sources, and you can use some of that. You use the information and learn how the heat moves through your facility, and use that to your advantage. When you stop to think about, let's just simply say a Modine heater. Modine heaters have a heat, basically a boiler or a hot air exchange unit at one end of the greenhouse and blowing down on the opposite end. If you would stick a thermostat or a thermometer closest to the heater, you would be surprised that the heat in that immediate area closest to the heater is actually the coolest end of the greenhouse. The warmest end of the greenhouse is where it blows to the far end of the tube and then dissipates. If you know that you have plants that can take a cooler environment, knowing where to put them on the bench closest to the heater or the heat source, or furthest away from the hot area, is certainly beneficial to you. When you look at hot water heat, nice even flow, even temperature exchange, and again, you don't really have too many hot spots with hot water. Right. Next up is really talking about irrigation. And I've always been taught, and I always have felt, that the person who's on the end of the hose or controls the irrigation is the person who controls the crop. And when we go back to that rooting environment, that very first growing zone where you're starting to keep the plant, you receive the plants, and now you're really bringing them on, here you have the opportunity to moisten your soil, plant aligners, wet them in again, and then you back off. Then you leave those plants alone. And it takes a lot of skill to do that. And it takes a lot of fortitude not to come back and water those plants if they are not calling for water. So we have obviously four different types of irrigation. You have the hand irrigation with the breaker. You have drip irrigation if you're growing individual pots once they get spaced out. You have boom irrigation. You have flood flooring. You also have capillary mat irrigation opportunities where the the plants are actually wicking the water up into the soil. All of them have benefits. All of them work extremely well, depending upon how your systems or how your greenhouses are set up. It's a great opportunity to, again, to know where to and how to use your facility to grow plants. And when you look at water, you have the opportunity to influence the speed of root activity as well as the speed of growth. Water is probably one of the very best growth regulators we have, as long as the right person is applying the water. Okay. Now we're going to talk, and we kind of touched on some of these things as we started going through, but I really want to talk about temperature, and there we're talking about rooting temperatures, growing temperatures, and holding temperatures. We would love to say that you can plant a plant at 65-degree ambient air temperature and sell it at 65 degrees ambient air temperature or 62 degrees ambient air temperature and run it all the way through your systems. And you could. You just don't have as much control of the growth of that plant that you would have if you actually use your greenhouses or your greenhouse facilities or even where other position on the bench as far as temperature. We talked about light levels as far as different types of greenhouse coverings, and we'll come back and look at that between high, medium, and low light. We'll also talk a little bit about the things you put in between your greenhouse roof and your crop on the bench. And there's a lot of times where we put hanging baskets, and each one of those hanging above the crop, and each one of those hanging baskets actually is reducing light level. I do have a slide on air circulation and the various types of air circulation that you have in a greenhouse, and again, how to use them and when to use them and why to use them. And then last but not least is we really want to talk about putting all the light crops together. It's a lot easier to grow. It's a lot easier to fertilize and to use growth regulators if all the like items are together. You don't want to put your heat lovers right next to your cold lovers, for example. So we have that opportunity to kind of look at planning ahead, and when you're planting and placing plants in the greenhouse, you have those opportunities to really fine-tune how the crops will produce as well as how they'll go out the door. All right. Most critical time in the crop's life, in my mind, is the first 10 to 12 days. That's when you plant the liner and get them to root to the outside edge of the pot. And it should take no more than 12 days. I've seen roots thrown from liner to, on a petunia, on a super petunia, from liner to outside edge of the pot in as short as 4 days. Many times on super petunias, you'll have roots to the bottom of the pot in 7 days. But it's critical to have that rooting temperature at 65 degrees. Now I realize that's a lot. It's a lot of heat putting into a greenhouse or into a greenhouse bench. And if you can put if you're flexible enough that you can have a rooting zone when you have small amounts of plant material coming in and run that particular area of that particular greenhouse at 65 to 72 degrees, you really be profitable or pay off as far as not trying to heat an entire greenhouse. When you get a larger blocks of material coming in, then you can open up full greenhouses or full bays in the greenhouse and run them warmer and root them all at the same time. But really, when you're looking at rooting a smaller crop or small amount, for example, for hanging baskets or for some of your larger containers, you really want to have a small environment that you can have your root zone temperature, that's your soil temperatures, not your ambient air temperature, but your soil temperature, between 65 and 72 degrees. Once the plants are rooted, once the roots are to the outside edge of the pot, then you're growing, you're not rooting anymore. And then you can drop the temperature on most varieties. But to get the roots, drive the roots to the outside edge of the pot, you really need the optimum soil temperature of 65 to 72 degrees. Now, once the plants have been rooted, then you can start growing them. And when you grow them, that's where you're really looking at how much environment or how much light you're giving the plant. You can bring your temperatures down, and now you can grow, depending upon the crop, anywhere from 55 degrees to 75 degrees if it's a tropical, if it's a canna, if it's a caladium, or a geranium. There, Angelo, you might want to bump those temperatures up. But for the most part, 55 to 65 degrees is absolutely the best growing temperature that you can have. And this is no longer soil temperature. This is now ambient air temperature. Your night temperatures can be 5 degrees lower, and actually should be, but your day temperatures you want to run between 55 and 65 degrees on most items. When you go through the catalog, if there's an item that is like a New Guinean patient where you're going to be running it a little bit warmer, those temperatures are identified as being in a separate or warmer environment. This picture also has a tendency to, can show you that here you're looking at grouping like environments or like plants together. This happens to be, what you're looking at is basically 5 different varieties of petunias, all of them blooming at the same time, all of them being grown in the same environment, as well as all the hanging baskets that you see are all the same format or same mix. Relatively easy to grow when everything requires the same amount of moisture, same amount of fertilizer, same PGRs, and same air temperatures. Now, once you get the plant established and you have it grown, and you are now waiting for your customers to show up at the door, here's where you have the opportunity to use water and air temperature as a checkpoint. Now, remember when I said the most ideal plant is the one that you plant it, grow it, and sell it, and there's no stopping. Unfortunately, that's not necessarily life. We all have the opportunities to be perhaps a little bit ahead of the game and get the crops where we want them or where they should be, and we're still growing them and the customers haven't shown up. And so rather than lose control of them, you can tone them. You can, what we call holding the plants, and you can start bringing them down and start to check their growth. And as you're checking their growth with temperature, you're also checking their growth with fertility, as well as with water or with holding water. When you look at this image that's on your screen, this is an outdoor holding or outdoor growing environment. A lot of people grow their garden mums outside during the summer. And as long as it's an opportunity for you to control the wind, or this happens to be between 2 greenhouses, you have the opportunity to be in a relatively protected area. Later on the slide, there's going to be a resource for you for how to set up an outdoor growing environment or an outdoor holding environment. And it's probably critical for you to start to think about how I can do this. But the most important thing is you want to trial it first, because there are times when, Chris, if you go to the next slide, you'll see what might cause a little bit of stress. Those plants are fine. Those happen to be 1 gallon petunias, but they are covered with snow. And you have to recognize the fact that sometimes you can be ready and Mother Nature says, oh, well, hold on a second, we have a snowstorm, or we have an ice storm, or we have or a combination of heavy rains and then followed by ice. All this is wonderful as long as you're prepared for it. And so the information that you will get as far as holding this material is fairly in-depth as far as where you are, when you can roll plant material out, what temperatures you roll them out at. Basically, you don't want to take a plant that's being grown at a 65 or 70 degree temperature and expose them to 28 degree temperatures outside, or even 38 degree temperatures outside. You want to kind of tone them down before they go outside. So it is critical. If you go to the next slide, Chris, you'll see that there's a fairly decent backup as far as what to find, where to find it. You need to have reliable weather source, or weather forecasting information. You need to, for example, I use dark sky, which is gives you a very consistent and important or accurate 7-day forecast. It also gives you a very accurate hour-by-hour forecast. You need to know what's in store for you, what's downstream for you. The other thing is that I don't care how well you have this plan made, you need to have another plan which will entail covering with a remade cloth, or having sprinklers in place that can ice the plants down and let them thaw out. It is critical to know that there is value in being prepared. But the last statement, or the second last statement on that slide, is every spring is different, and there's lots of value in having outdoor growing space, but perhaps it's not worth the stress. For 15 years, one of the first things that I did every morning is get up and not every morning, but during the mornings when we had plant materials sitting outside, the first thing I did was went out and checked out frost, and how much frost or how cold had the crops gotten, and get out there at 3 o'clock in the morning and wash the frost off. I'm not sure that that is important anymore to me. I would have a tendency to say that I would put up a second greenhouse or another greenhouse simply to hold that environment, rather than starting my day every morning with the outside working in 34 to 38 degree temperatures. But it does work, and it produces a phenomenal crop, and your plants are going to be toned for your customer. But it's a matter of knowing how to do this. And I will tell you again, start small, put a couple of flats out, trial it, see what happens to the crop, look at the difference in growing conditions between that crop and the next. This is a link that will give you all sorts of cultural information, and there are a number of other links that are coming up. But if you get a chance to take a look at this, there are some great articles as far as individual culture on each crop, as well as how to set up outdoor growing areas, how to look at how plants progress through this process, as well as each individual variety. Again, we talked about that. This is an article that you'll see on this link that goes to seasonal outdoor growing space and what to find and how to do it. Okay, different temperatures for different plant activities. Mention the fact that 65 to 72 degrees is the ideal range for soil temperatures for optimum growth. When you're actually growing the plant, you're going to be running anywhere from 55 to 75 degrees, depending upon the type of crop, and then Holding or checking the plant test where you're using temperature and water as a natural growth regulator. In each one of these situations, your night temperatures, when dusk hits, your temperatures should drop, and you want those temperatures to be roughly 5 degrees lower than your growing range. So if you're running a growing range of 65 to 72, your night temperatures should be running roughly 60 to 67 degrees. Okay. Mentioned light levels in different within different structures. This is a really good example of growing various levels of growth within your greenhouse. When you look at every basket that's overhead, every line that's overhead is actually causing shade. And when you're looking at the plant material that's underneath, you'll notice that they kind of flow up and down. That's not necessarily due to lower light, or when I say flow, some are taller than plants on the middle of the bench are taller than plants on the end of the bench. That's not necessarily due to light. That's necessarily due to drips of water coming off the baskets. So do recognize the fact that not only are you're getting many more plants per greenhouse or per square foot because you do have this space above the benches, but you also have to recognize the fact that it is going to cause some stretching because of lower light, and in addition to the stretching, you're going to have plants that get extra fertilizer and extra water that you can't use. You can't use moisture levels to control the plants when you're getting them wet from both sides. Greenhouse lighting, it is amazing when you look at the changes in technology today compared to where they were. When you look at, the difference between these two greenhouses, one is high pressure sodium and one is LEDs. The LEDs are much lower cost to run, a little bit higher input costs, but so much information out there, and certainly there's a lot of very, very strong information as far as what types of lighting to use, when to use them, based on what type of structure, what type of plant, and what type of growth you're attempting to get out of that plant. And then the last slide on environment is on air circulation. When you stop to think about growing environments in greenhouses, you have based on the type of heat that you're using and the type of structure that you have, covering that you have the opportunity to build up an absolutely wonderful Florida environment in the middle of February in your greenhouses in the north, which is great for you for those 15 minutes that you walk in and breathe deep, but it's not great for the plants that are sitting there growing in that environment. And as difficult it is to throw that high heat and warm, moist air out, it's certainly something that's best for the plants. You need to have 90% of the plants like to grow in an environment where the humidity level isn't overpowering, isn't above 60% or 65%. And you can do that through venting your greenhouses and exhausting that hot air and using a decondensate cycle. Just come in and you'll know immediately if you have too much humidity in the air, especially if you have a double poly house. When you open the door and the door slams shut and all of a sudden there's a rainstorm 3/4 of the way down, all the moisture is dripping off the double poly. It's extremely important, and especially at once the sun starts to set, you want to make sure that you get that moisture level off the plants and vacate that out to the outside and bring nice, cool, drier air inside. Most of the fungal diseases that we get in greenhouses, especially in double poly greenhouses, can be avoided simply by using better air circulation management. Not saying that you have to have all the bells and whistles. You don't have to have the huge exhaust fans. You don't have to have fan and pad cooling, for example. All you have to do is be able to, turn on a fan and get the air circulating from outdoors to indoors without necessarily bringing a cold draft down on the plants, but get that hot, wet, moist air out of the greenhouse and replace it with cool air, and your plants will be a lot better off. Putting like crops together, again, we've talked about that slide with lots of petunias looking at you. And again, the value of putting your crops together is really looking at how you can treat everything. You minimize the amount of labor that you're putting into that crop. When you're watering all the same. When you're fertilizing all the same parts per million. And when you're shipping and when you're pulling products out, you can pull crops out all the same. Looking at that, the ability to do that really makes your life a lot easier and a lot simpler. Okay. Here, what I wanted to do is talk about taking advantage of the resources that you have. When you look at the human resources, usually what happens is we recognize what we can grow and what we can't grow. You may not recognize it the first time around, but you certainly recognize it by the end of the crop. And knowing how much you have to water, how much you have to fertilize, how much you have to take care of, you look at the fact that how much do I have, how much talent does our facility or greenhouse facility, what can we do? What can we handle reasonably well? And if there's somebody else in the neighborhood that or within shipping distance that perhaps can handle crops that are a little bit outside your talent range, take advantage of that. Talk to them. Let them handle the tough stuff, and you do the easy stuff. Or if you have particular crops that that your customers know that you bring quality material to the market, can somebody else do the easy stuff? Can somebody else grow your super petunias or your calibrachoas? Recognizing the talents that you have, the time that you have, and the space that you have. Also looking as far as management, looking at your facilities. What can you grow? If you're working with gas forced air, can you grow tropicals? Can you grow in plants that need higher heat? Or is it better to have somebody else do that? And then time. Look at how much time can you actually devote to this crop or to these crops or to the entire spring and summer collection as far as scheduling. How much can you sell at early season? When do you open your doors? When do your customers start knocking on the door? When can you sell early? When can you sell mainstream? And what crops can you put in your greenhouse for shoulder season, for late June, July heat, or even fall crops? So looking at time management, looking at the amount of time it takes to schedule the crop, when your sales windows are there, and what crops will fit into your sales window. And then lastly, the assortment. Everybody says, well, what should I grow? How should I grow it? And it's like, I don't know. We are lucky enough to have 7 different super petunias that are pink. Do you need to grow all 7? Nah, absolutely not. What are the best sellers? Which ones work for you? What are your color assortments that work across the board? What container sizes? Should you grow in a 6.5 inch rather than a 4.5 inch? Are your customers looking for that product that is going to give them instant gratification, or are they willing to wait a few minutes for the plants to grow up? And then finally, what are the current trends? One thing I do want to mention, I don't think I put it anywhere in the slides, is really talking about your parking lot. If you know who's pulling into your parking lot, whether you're, are your customers coming in and they have the resources to buy larger containers, instant gratification containers, as compared to someone who wants to come in and build their own combinations and mix and match their own gardens, planted their own gardens. But know your customers who are coming in, and that way you can make your determination as far as what size container and what's your finish date on those containers. Selecting for varieties for success, do your homework. What works for you? What do your customers want? Who are your customers? And I think that's extremely important. What do they want? What do they want to buy? And then how much do your customers want to spend? It's really easy to have a price point in mind and your customers have another price point in mind. Now, I need to just let you know past experiences. Sometimes we have a tendency to set our prices too low. And naturally, a customer is not going to turn around and say, I think this is worth $1 more. And they slide you a buck more than you have on the retail price point. That's usually not the case. See who's selling what in your neighborhood. How far are your customers driving to find you? Who else is in your neighborhood? What do they want? Can they get the cheaper stuff somewhere else and just get the nice stuff, nice profit-making margins, or profit margin-making items from you? That's all about recognizing who your customer is. And what easy way is, what are they driving? What are they, when they drive into your parking lot, what are they driving? And you can make some judgment calls as far as what actually works for them. I know that we had a slide up earlier on another resource. Here are 3 other resources that are available to you. The first one is all the cultural information as far as each individual crop. This information is going to be on the webinar. You can write it down, or available from the archives, but you can certainly write it down and capture it now. Online catalogs, if you want to see and again, all the catalogs have cultural information in it. There's more on the website, but there certainly is plenty in the catalog. And then last is the grower hotline. We put together every 2 weeks during the growing season, and every month beyond that, all the different topics as far as what's the difference between supertunia, different types of supertunias, cultural stories, as well as cultural information and updates as far as what we see and where we're going and what we'd like to, what information is important for you to see to grow the best crop possible. Okay. Here's the fun part. In 3 weeks, we're rolling out 2018 introductions, and I have the opportunity to really show you 11 new items, and I think the total is 40 new selections this year. So what I want to do is the first slide is all about the improvements. Last year we introduced or we improved 17 different items. This year we're improving, I believe it's 14 items that are currently in our assortment, and we're improving them. The improvements are being made for production purposes. Either the flower is faster to finish, it has an earlier flower time, it has a better branching habit. When you look at the first 2 items that are on this slide, you see Argyranthemum and Golden Butterfly and Argyranthemum and Vanilla Butterfly. Golden Butterfly was, or Butterfly, the original Butterfly was introduced 22 years ago. It's a strong seller. It still is a strong seller. The wonderful thing about the new introduction, Golden Butterfly, is it is a much stronger branching plant. The color is more vibrant. It flowers roughly the same time as the original Butterfly. So it's what makes it more valuable is the fact that it's less likely to go into a strong upright growth habit, whereas some of the other varieties, or some of the original butterflies, have a tendency to grow like a totem pole if they aren't grown under the proper lighting conditions. It is a plant that will throw a flower but still maintain a very strong apical dominance. It's the new golden butterfly and the new vanilla butterfly branch extremely well, and they're make beautiful whole series because they now match perfectly with the pure white butterfly that we introduced last year. So those are the first two: golden butterfly and vanilla butterfly improved. The next item, or the next two items, are Calibrachoas, Superbells. Superbells plum improved. The improvement on plum is both flowering time as well as flowering size. When you look at the original Superbells plum, the flower was about an inch in diameter. This is closer to an inch and a half. It is a plant that now has a much more compact habit. The flowers are all borne on the surface, so you don't have a whole lot of foliage that are tucking up in between the flowers and semi-burying the flowers. Here you'll have a bouquet or a total display of huge flowers all the way across the top. This is naturally going to bloom in week 9, so it is earlier by 2 weeks from the original plum, Superbells plum. Just a great plant. The other Superbells that is an improvement is Superbells white. The white is just a pure white flower color. It is flowery in week 11. The value of this plant is the fact that it is so much more compact, so much easier to grow as far as less PGRs that are required. Just gives you a beautiful canopy, much more uniform branching. In the past, when we looked at almost all our improvements on the Calibrachoas, is really focused on controlled branching and getting flowers earlier. So this is a nice bouquet plant. Matches perfectly with Superbells yellow that we introduced this past year. And the last improvement on this, or the last new variety on this page, is Dioecia Flirtation Pink improved. When you look at the dioecias, good, strong, wonderful shoulder crops. Love the cold temperatures. Anywhere you can grow pansies, you can grow dioecias. They're just absolutely gorgeous plants. But at the same time, looking at when you sell these, a lot of times people have a tendency to put pansies, to sell pansies, grow them cool, and then put them in their warm retail areas. Same thing with the dioecias or lobelias. Here's another plant that you can move outside and let your customers make their selections from the outdoor sales environment rather than from an indoor sales environment. Plants are tough. They certainly could take mid-30s or upper 30s without any problem at all. The plants themselves perform extremely well. The improvement on Flirtation Pink is a richer, stronger color with a larger flower. Okay.
And John, I'll say that as someone who's been covering spring trials for more than 2 decades, that I generally ignore improvements because they're not noticeable. In your case, Improvement Winner's case, the improvements I saw last year were from 50 yards. You could see the improvement over the old variety. So these are truly like new varieties.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris. And really, that's what we're looking at. I mean, there's only so much room on a retail bench, you know, and so if we have a tried and true performer, how can we make it better? And I think we're not looking for a little bit better. We're looking for a lot better, and that's where we focus.
All right, here's some brand new things.
Brand new, right. Here we have. Actually, we have 2 new Superbells doubles, which we've never had doubles before, at least not in the States. And so now we have Superbells Double Ruby, as well as we have a Superbells Orchid, which is not pictured. But these are both absolutely beautiful little carnation or little mini rose type of flowers, good strong performers, and again, looking for that bouquet of flower coverage. Color is outstanding on ruby, and on orchid it looks like it could easily be confused for a Acapulco double impatient. Just lots and lots of flower color. Great strong plants. The next new item is another double that we've never had before, and that's a double osteospermum. Osteospermum Bright Lights Double Moon Glow. The great thing about osteospermum, double osteospermum, is that you eliminate the need or the plant's response to close at night or close as light levels decrease. So you have osteospermum that their flowers remain open and can be enjoyed by gardeners in the evening, whereas so many, the single osteos will close up at night. Good, strong performance. Again, we recognize the fact that osteos are normally cool-loving plants. Our selection on the bright lights they perform throughout the summer and continue to flower their heads off. So not only do you have longer flower period, but you also have longer duration that flowers are open. And that's where Bright Lights Double Moon Glow fits in. We have one new Supertunia to really lead into the whole collection of charms that we're bringing to the market. Supertunia Mulberry Charm. The charms are small flowers, small flowered Supertunias. They have a tendency to fill the niche of that gardeners need for planting a small flower Calibrachoa type plant in the garden. Calibrachoas don't necessarily like the ground, so we have really selected Supertunia charms to fill that desire. And when you look at Mulberry Charm is the same color as Supertunia Bordeaux. It's a bluish purple, just covered with flowers. Real early plant, will actually be in bloom week 5, week 6. Just tremendous flowering plant. Next item is one that is unbelievable, different color than we've ever had before. This is Phlox Intensia Red Hot. Now here's a plant, and I need to certainly put a disclaimer on it. This is one of those plants that has an extremely efficient root system. Where that pays off for the gardener is the fact that once it's established, it doesn't like water. What is important for the grower to know is it doesn't like water. I think we've all seen liners that somewhere after the 4th or 5th week, plant starts to flower its head off, and you knock it over to see what the root system looks like, and it never really rooted out to the outside edge of the pot. Intensias will do that because they don't need that big of a root system, but it's extremely important to establish the plant. So this is one that you run dry, very dry. It is a warm, loving plant. One of its parents was a Houston ditchweed, or is a Houston ditchweed. It really likes high humidity, high heat, and not a lot of water. So Intensia Red Hot, just outstanding plant, beautiful color, big, beautiful red flowers. But again, run it on the dry side, and you'll love it. And then the last new plant is Superbena Stormburst. Superbena Stormburst is a sport off of another Superbena that we have called Violet Ice. Violet Ice has a purple flower. This is bicolor. And we have noticed in our surveys with consumers that 16% of all people prefer, or the preference for bicolors is growing by 16% this past year. It's a very, very strong market and lots of interest in the flower. Very nice plant, full blooming plant, great basket, at the same time, nice grande and nice landscape item as well.
Yeah, I think your marketing guy, Marshall, says that bicolor isn't it one of the favorite colors now among consumers?
Correct. It's the second largest. Purple first, bicolor second.
Bicolor as a color. That's pretty cool. Well, John, I'm looking forward to seeing all of these and more in about 2.5 weeks out in California. So thanks for the sneak peek at those. And now we're going to take just a minute or two for a couple of questions that have come in, and I've got one or two myself. John Russell wants to know Calibrachoa plugs. Do you recommend a low rate of Florel to increase branching on your Calibrachoa plugs?
They certainly benefit from it. Again, once you get that plant established, get the roots to the outside edge of the pot, then hit it with a very small part per million of Florel. Each plant is, the rates are identified in the catalog, but that certainly helps cause additional branching and get the flowers out all the way across the canopy.
How much will it delay flowering?
You're probably delaying it with a small percentage of part per million. Probably the most it will delay is 2 weeks.
Okay, not so bad if you want to make a really nice full branched plant. I'm curious, you listed a lot of different places where a grower can mess up. What's the most common mistake in all your travels that you see growers, even good growers, make when they're producing proven winners? If you're going to fix one thing, what would it be?
Well, I think it's water management. I think the most important thing is we want to grow too quickly, get the plant established, and it can be done with moist soil, not wet soil. So get the roots to the outside edge of the pot first, and then use water as the most natural PGR we have.
Great advice. And lastly, I was curious, I've seen the benefit of hardening off on spring crops, especially say petunias, things like that. Short of having an expensive retractable roof greenhouse, what's the best system you've seen for hardening off, doing outdoor growing, but being able to still protect the plants?
Well, I think one that is relatively inexpensive, especially so many of us have greenhouse operations that have space out or space between the facilities, in between each greenhouse, and use that area as a protected area, but put sprinklers, overhead impact sprinklers, on a temperature regulated solenoid. So when the temperature hits 33 degrees, those sprinklers come on and they irrigate. And they'll put a sheen of ice over the top of the plants, and the ice won't damage the plants. And it's relatively inexpensive to do.
And I know some growers have done that, been scared to death, they've ruined the crop, and they turn out the best crop they've ever produced.
I've seen them totally covered at 7 o'clock in the morning and totally being shipped out at 10. So
that's right. All right. Well, if anybody has more questions, shoot John an email. Simple, john@provenwinners.com. And you answer it 24/7. Is that right?
Pretty much. Pretty much.
From the palatial office there in Rochester. And if you want to rewatch this webinar to pick up some of those details, some of his links, or share it with colleagues, bosses, employees, or whoever, it'll be up within the next, hopefully the next couple of hours at ballpublishing.com/webinars. And a quick commercial. I've got another upcoming webinar, but not till well after spring trials. This one is going to be Wednesday, April 19th, sponsored by Phillips, and it's Growing Edible Crops, Lettuce, Herbs, Tomatoes, and More with LED lighting. I wonder what I'll have for lunch on the day of that webinar. I guess we'll just have to see. All right, but John, I greatly appreciate your time today. We've learned a lot. On behalf of John and his colleagues at Proven Winners and my stellar staff here at Ball Publishing, who always make it into work no matter how much snow has fallen, I'm Chris Beatty saying happy snow shoveling, everybody.